I'm your host, journalist Amanda Ulrich, and today we are joined by Alana Newhouse, who is a writer, and she's also the editor-in-chief of Tablet magazine, which she has described, I think it's a good description, as a Jewish magazine about the world. So today we're going to be talking about a recent cover story for Tablet, her career a little bit, some background about Tablet magazine. Alana, thanks so much for joining the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So just to kick it off, we're talking about this one particular cover story for November that Tablet ran that talks about factory farming, industrially produced meat, kind of the very inhumane conditions that exist, especially for pig farming and pork. For those who maybe haven't read the story, or maybe they have and would still like some background, can you talk a little bit about how that story came about, kind of the powerful details that came up in that reporting?
Sure. So the story is called American Treif. Treif is a Yiddish word, which technically means not kosher, which is a designation in Jewish law for meat. But treif has come to have a meaning beyond that. The meaning is anything that's forbidden or that should be seen as unclean or bad for you. And so treif could be used colloquially for something that you want to describe as out of bounds or outside of propriety. And so for me, we use the title here in part because it's perfect, because we're talking about the production of what's fundamentally the most iconic, not kosher item, but also because from ethically and morally, I think this is the definition of something that is unclean and that should be considered out of bounds. The story focuses primarily on an instrument called gestation crates. And these are crates that pigs are kept in when they give birth to their babies, and they are quite literally penned in. And the thing about gestation crates is they prevent everything that is the most natural behavior on the part of a pig. And so they prevent rooting, they prevent the kind of all the natural farming behavior that pigs are used to and that pigs have evolved into. Gestation crates effectively stop, and they prevent them from doing. Is it technically, are the pigs being abused physically? Are they being tortured? Are they being whipped and wounded? Generally speaking, no. Although I'm sure that there are many instances of pigs being mistreated in that way. But what the gestation crates are is that they're a fundamentally immoral practice, in my view. And when you study it, you realize that actually not only are they immoral and unethical, they're also politically really irrational, and they make kind of no sense. And the thing that really got to me was when I heard that many farming communities and farming activists, these are people who actually run the local farms, farmers, had banded together. They had used the political system exactly the way it's supposed to be used, and they had convinced their states at a local level to outlaw the gestation crates and to not force them to use them. The federal government then came in and decided to overrule the states. And given the fact that we currently have a Republican administration, that Republican administration claims to care about states' rights, claims to care about the balance of power between the states and the federal government. That federal government also claims to care about the increasing power of China. And in this industry, you're dealing with several companies, including Smithfield, that are owned by Chinese companies. And this administration also, through the MAHA movement, claims to care about chronic disease and the ethics of farming. And there's a fourth thing, which is this administration, and particularly the coalition that brought them into power, has at its root evangelical and religious communities that also are very horrified by this practice. So you have four enormous pressures pushing against gestation crates. That's even before you get to the idea that it's just, as a human being, if you hear about them and you see them, you will recoil from it. And yet, this is the situation that we're in. And so for me, it felt like a story that is exactly a tablet story, where we're trying to isolate and highlight corners of the American landscape particularly, but also of the globe, where things are not working the way that they could or should be in order to make life better for more people. And in this case, more living things.
Do you think that much of the American public has a sense that the meat that they're consuming is probably not produced in a great way, but it's a difficult reality to accept, to open yourself up to the details and look at those things? It's one thing to kind of know, okay, probably the meat that I eat every day is not produced in a humane way. And it's another thing to, I think once you learn the details, you actually have to make, a choice that is difficult to your day-to-day routine.
I think that you just put your finger on it. I don't know what people know consciously. I don't know what they know subconsciously, but won't make themselves accept. What I do know is that tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of Americans have huge economic problems. And this feels like a huge ask, frankly. And it also feels exactly like the role for leadership. This is what we have leadership for. We have leadership to help the situation, to create the conditions to make this decision easier for Americans. And in this case, you have a set of Americans who have fought to make those conditions possible for their fellow citizens. And then you have the government fighting against those people. To me, that feels, it feels like a perfect story to focus on, because it feels like a challenge that is easily dealt with, frankly, if there was the will.
Right. Because I think what I was feeling as I was reading this story is, on the one hand, shock that things like gestation crates exist and that these are the conditions that exist in a lot of farming operations across the US. But then also, in a lot of ways, you're not shocked, because you assume it is one of those things you kind of, many close their eyes to just exist and go about your daily life.
I'd like for people to not be afraid to think about things that are hard. And I would like for people to not be afraid to learn about this. One of the things that I found very heartening in the piece is that I think at this point, because of the activists at the local level and because of these farmers, now almost 40% of pigs in the US are not born or bred in gestation crates. And that is a really, really incredible change. But again, these things are happening at the local level, and they're in some senses being fought by the federal government, which is very frustrating. But what is heartening about that is that there are increasing options, and there are increasing improvements that are being made by people's fellow citizens. And there's also there are more and more places to get the kind of meat that is more, that is bred and produced more ethically. So I get the bigness of the challenge, and I get the bigness of the issue. And I understand why it can feel overwhelming or demoralizing, frankly. But I also want people, when they read this piece, to understand that this is a lever, and you have, as a citizen, you have the opportunity to actually push at this and make not only your own life better and the way that your family functions better, but actually potentially an opportunity to make the country better.
Right. In your letter from the editor that went along with this cover story, of course, you have room and come out and say very plainly that you think people should not be eating industrially produced meat. How do you approach, whenever you write a letter from the editor, how do you approach the writing of that? And how do you hope people read what you have to say in conjunction with a story? Do you hope they read it first and then go into the story with that in mind, or later? Like, how do you approach your role there?
I struggle with it actually each month, because I don't struggle with picking the topic, because it lights up for me. Every month there is a story that feels to me like it's a story that has most surprised me or challenged me, or is something that I've long felt committed to and want to frame for our readers in my own voice. But the larger question here is about sort of my role as an editor, which is really what I am. I can string together a sentence, but fundamentally, spiritually, as a person, I'm an editor. And so what I try to do, I tend to not try to Bigfoot on the landscape that my writers have to work on. So that's where the challenge of my editor's letters come in, because what I'm not looking to do is I'm not looking to preemptively torque how readers read the pieces in the magazine. Because of the nature of the organization, the architecture of the magazine, my letter comes first, and I write it with the idea that it's coming first. So rather than assume that readers have read that piece, what I do is I actually just try to frame it and try to create. It's almost like throat clearing, like before you introduce someone, the little amount that you'll say about them,
right,
just to get people situated.
Right. Clinking a glass and introducing someone.
Exactly.
That makes sense. I'm also curious too, the two writers of this story are, at least it seems from briefly Googling and seeing their bio on Tablet's website, but are not traditional journalists. So they come from, they both kind of work for animal welfare groups. And then Philip is the CEO of one organization that they mention, of course, favorably in the story. I'm curious how you kind of balance those backgrounds. And of course, this story towards the end, they start talking about faith-driven farmers and do have that layered voice, and that kind of opinion comes in the second act of the story.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're also not American. They're both British. So, this is a magazine. It's not a newspaper. And so our issues, the way that we cover issues, have different rules of the game, basically, as far as I believe. And so bias, quote unquote, or conflict works very differently. In fact, conflict is a reality for magazine writers. It's just a reality that has to be managed. It's not a reality that we try to scrub away. So in the case of Philip and Ben, Philip himself was very central to the European Union's eradication of their own use of gestation crates. And I don't want to make a secret of this. I think these things are a horror. And I thought they were a horror before I commissioned the piece. And I commissioned the piece with that in mind. I was not objective. Now, nor was I ignorant. This is a practice that I studied and I read up on a lot myself. I also read a lot of the literature and the arguments, particularly by congressmen who are on the other side of the EATS Act, which is the federal legislation, and just found it deeply unconvincing. And so the piece is written as a piece that's meant to be a scourge against this. This is not meant to be an unbiased newspaper reportage at all. And I don't hide that, in part because I actually just want to be honest with readers. I'm focusing on this piece because we have a very strong opinion about it already. That said, as you rightly noted, in the piece itself, the opinion is light up until the end. And I think that was just Philip and Ben's storytelling choices, and what they thought how they thought they would best engage the reader in the way that they saw. But yeah, there's no hiding the perspective here.
Right. And I did see that the brief sentence bios about both of them on the Tablet website mention those things and mention their backgrounds. Is that ever something that you consider adding as kind of like a little editor's note at the end of a story or before or somewhere?
It's in the story too. So it's the issue itself in print has both of their bios in the contributor section, and that it's very plainly put there.
Right. I think that makes sense of being open, and that this isn't a straight objective journalism piece. This is a piece of narrative writing that comes from these two people who are in this world, and they
Absolutely.
have this view.
Yep.
That makes sense. Can you talk a little bit about, so you founded Tablet in 2009, obviously in a much different climate, politically and otherwise, than we have now. Can you talk about how and why you founded it in the first place, and kind of how the identity of the magazine has changed since then?
Sure. So if you think back to 2009, we all thought the internet was going to be this great place of like a lot of exciting conversation and engaging audiences globally. And it was going to be an instrument for elevating discourse and democratizing discourse. I, at the time, wanted to start a magazine because I was very interested in identity. And I felt that identity was in the West, or in Western countries, particularly in the US, becoming an intellectual issue, or an issue of ideas that struck me as fascinating. And because Jewish identity is not just my own identity and something that I've thought about a lot, but also something that's played this very interesting and unique role in the US, both as kind of outsiders and also insiders. It struck me as a really generative topic for a magazine to explore online, as the opportunities for a global audience emerged. But to be perfectly honest, I thought it was going to be like 18 months. I thought it was a great 2-year project that would be a fun publication that ran for a little while, that looked at something for this brief window in time. What then happened was that, now looking back on it, what happened was that journalism as an industry began to experience a great deal of strain. And at first, Tablet started publishing pieces in little corners of the landscape that we felt, we just were like, nobody's covering these stories, we might as well. And we sort of tried to fill the vacuum, but it was a little bit reflexive and kind of unconscious. In part because I think we didn't know what we were looking at. And then there started to be more and more of those areas that we felt we needed to cover. And those areas also started to expand outside of Jewish life. This really picks up right before and during COVID, as we start to look at what we saw as a kind of troubling decay of American sense-making institutions, which includes not only universities and media and museums and cultural institutions, but also healthcare, the federal government, the state governments. Like basically all of the interlocking institutions that maintained American life, the economy. And so we started to bring that perspective of what happens when you're looking at institutions that may be broken. Can you analyze them? And can you say this one is mostly working? And so the energy that you put toward it is conserving energy or preserving energy. This one is broken, but worth saving. So the energy that you put into it is reforming energy or helping energy. And these institutions are too far gone and they're not going to be relevant for our future. So that rubric or that framework way of thinking about institutions ends up really driving Tablet's coverage in the last 5 or 6 years. And what that kind of is it's the theme behind that idea of being a Jewish magazine about the world. So we bring a Jewish perspective and that perspective of kind of outsiders and insiders to stories. But often those stories don't have the word Jew, Judaism, Jewish in them at all. For us, we can see the perspective all over it, but it may not be necessarily obvious from the outside.
Mm-hmm. Hey everyone, Amanda here with a quick intermission. If you're liking this episode and want more behind-the-scenes stories like this one, make sure to follow the Sunday Long Read podcast on Spotify, Apple, or wherever else you get your podcasts. You can also check out our website at sundaylongread.com. There you'll find original stories, our true crime newsletter, and of course, our weekly newsletter. You can become a Sunday Long Read member for only $5 a month and get early and exclusive editions of the newsletter. And now, back to the episode. How has your role as editor-in-chief changed since October 7th, 2023? How has, especially because, as you said, that these stories are not just straight journalism, they have that sense of voice and opinion in them. And of course, you're getting submissions from contributors that have a certain perspective either way. How do you balance what that voice is, especially because the Jewish community across the world and in the US has been fractured in terms of their perspective on, everything?
Totally.
Do you try and have a 50-50 split of pro-Israel, anti-Israel, or how do you approach as an editor-in-chief what the voice of a Jewish magazine is in 2025?
So part of the job here is also to see Tablet inside of a media landscape that is broader. Tablet's a nonprofit. So I raise money every year to run a magazine that is supposed to be additive. I am supposed to be giving readers something that they don't get everywhere else. What that means is if I basically give you a warmed over version of the pieces that you're reading in the New York Times or the pieces that you're reading in the Washington Post or the pieces that you're reading in the New Yorker, I'm wasting people's money. I have to give you, my readers, I have to give them something that adds to their diet. Maybe it adds in ways that create friction, and maybe it adds in ways that are challenging for them. But it has to be different from what they're reading everywhere else. That's the way that I see it. And so on any given issue, it doesn't matter to me where the story lands. And I don't even analyze it that way. What matters to me is this a story that my readers are likely to read some version of it somewhere else? If the answer is yes, we don't run it. And in terms of the way that my job since October 7th has changed, it's changed in one very, very clear way, which is we have a much younger readership now. And we have a bunch of younger staffers, particularly one woman who's become our deputy editor. Her name is Ani Wilsensky, who's part of a generation Also our audio producer, Quinn, who's sitting in my sight line here, and a group of other people who are basically what other people would call Gen Zers. And they represent the biggest cohort of our growing readership. And to the extent that I've had, it's been a joy actually to recede a little bit and give them the space to take up the oxygen in the room. But that has been the biggest change, is me making space for their perspectives, because I don't think I ever could come up with the story ideas that they come up with or the perspectives that they want to see in the magazine.
That's interesting. So you kind of see your role as having stories that make people think or challenge people in some way, rather than finding what the majority of the Jewish community feels and saying that thing.
You know, we did a piece. Absolutely. That's correct. We did a piece in the summer of 2023, where we effectively, two long-standing and pretty central tablet writers, wrote a long piece arguing for the end of U.S. military aid to Israel. Go and argue like that. There is no way in the summer of 2023 that was remotely any version of a majority view inside of either Jewish life or, frankly, broader American life. That's not my job is not to actually reflect any kind of majority. My job is to try to make sure that public discourse and intellectual life is being challenged. And sometimes that making it be challenged means throwing into our conversation things that seem like they're coming from left field, but ultimately I think elevate and mature the intellectual life here.
That's interesting, because I think, as I was looking through your stories before this conversation, and I'm sure others do too as they're reading through, do you find that people are trying to figure out what the perspective of tablet is, especially in the last couple of years, of trying to pin down, okay, which side is this coming from? And your point is there's not a side.
Correct. And but that's in a way, yes, that's definitely a phenomenon that we experience. But it's also a phenomenon we've experienced since 2009. We've always been hard to pin down. And I think that in the last 6 or 7 years, I have to say that if I have a politics, my politics is about that assessment of institutions and the assessment of the health of the ideas, the institutions, the art, the policies that we take for granted or that are central parts of our lives, and not assuming that those are either right or wrong. Just because everybody says that a specific policy or a specific piece of art is bad or wrong or shallow, I don't necessarily know that to be true. And it feels really important for me that we have people with good but also challenging opinions in this space, texturizing and complicating the conversation around, especially around some of the most radioactive subjects.
Right, definitely. As I was looking through certain stories, there was one story from a couple months ago where the first sentence is, Israel is not starving Gaza, and certain sentences like that. Do you ever, as you're, maybe reading a story that ends up in the magazine, do you worry that this might alienate another side of the community, or do you kind of put things together like a puzzle as a tapestry of all of these different opinions that exist? How do you ever have a feeling of maybe that's something too far to say, or how do you approach that?
I imagine that fully 70 to 80% of what we publish is alienating of someone. And I take it seriously. I take that alienation seriously. The challenge, I think, sometimes is that a lot of times people don't realize that the things the stories that make them feel seen and understood and that feel like a relief and a warm bath to them are alienating for someone else.
Mm-hmm.
I see all of it. I see all the cohorts being alienated by everything that Tablet publishes.
Mm-hmm.
And I get all the hate mail and I get all the emails. And what I try to do is I try not to be gratuitous about it. We're not trolling to troll. I try my best not to challenge for challenge's sake. I'm not trying to make anybody uncomfortable because I'm trying to torture them. I do think that it is very, very important that people hear opinions that make them uncomfortable if they want to play in the space of public discourse. If you don't, I completely respect it. And if you're like, I have cousins who are like, I don't want to think about politics. I don't want to talk about politics. I'm a dentist. I want to go to my dental chair every day. And that's what I want to focus on. And I cannot respect that more. I absolutely do. And those people are serving their community. They're serving their families. There is complete integrity in that idea, to me, in my opinion. That said, if you want to actually play in the space of public discourse, you're going to have to hear the other side. And you're going to have to hear the best version of the other side of the argument if you want to be a fighter in that ring. If you just want to hear the same argument over and over again that you hear everywhere else, I just think there are so many publications out there for you that are repeating the same ideas over and over again. And I don't need to be that.
That's interesting. Yeah. Yeah. You talking about hate mail and emails, and I'm sure has that just ramped up exponentially in the last couple of years for you? Or have you always, I'm sure, obviously being a Jewish magazine, there's always been an element of people with opinions, or what does that look like in the last couple of years for you?
It is exponentially different. We have always had hate mail. The hate mail used to be funnier.
Oh,
frankly. It's like, I remember when we got early on in the magazine, we publish a lot on cooking and on food, and we have a lot of recipes. And we published a recipe for noodle kugel in one of our first years that got like a venomous, I mean, like truly like we were Nazis. I mean, it was unbelievable. But I loved it because it was funny and it felt, to me, to be perfectly honest, it felt benign. And these days the hate feels less benign, and it feels like the stakes are higher. We live in a society, but this is not just about at all, just about Jews. And Jews, Israel, Judaism, ethnic identity, religious identity, these are obviously very, very radioactive right now in this moment. But in general, we have a society that's an incredible strife and very, very tense with enormous stress all over. And that stress is coming out in ways that I think we're seeing can be very dangerous. And that is on all ends of the political spectrum,
mm-hmm.
and in all parts of life, and it's seemingly from every precinct of American society. And so a piece of hate mail or an email that is threatening feels different these days than it ever did.
I think it's also interesting in talking to you, the challenge of running opinion pieces that have opinion to them, but then also trying to maintain not having one single opinion on an editorial board level.
It's very hard.
Yeah, a very challenging mix of opinion here, not opinion here. How do we balance the opinion?
And not only that, but there are times where because we have because the social media disaggregates the conversation, and certain pieces will go viral, and I don't control the pieces that go viral, right? All of a sudden, a piece can go viral and seem to determine in people's minds Tablet. and what Tablet thinks on a given topic. But I published 7 pieces on that topic. The one that went viral is the one that you saw. And that's part of the challenge with a social media driven web presence, but it's just also the reality. There's something we can do about it. So I don't bemoan it too much, and I kind of just live with it. But it's one of those weird features that does not happen in print. In print, even if you don't read the piece that you don't agree with, you have to physically pass it by. So your eye sees it, right? You see the headline of the piece that you decided not to read because you didn't agree with it, but you know it was there. On the internet, you don't ever have to see what you don't agree with. Right.
Was that also your love for print, is having that experience of, and I think, I definitely share that same feeling of being able to open something up and even having the experience of reading through. It feels a lot more leisurely than just switching between a tab that's Gmail and then an article you're reading and then something you have to do for work. Feeling leisurely, but then also, not having that echo chamber of the internet to be seeing everything side by side.
It absolutely was. And in fact, it was a huge part of when you get Tablet now in print, the table of contents is on one page, and it has every single thing in the magazine. And we design the table of contents now as it's basically the inside of the cover. And it's part of the cover, in part because I don't want anyone skipping it. I want you to have to see everything in this magazine, even the things that you're not going to read. So I don't want anyone to miss a story like American Trafe. That one happens to be on the cover, so it's going to be hard to miss. But I don't want one of the pieces that I know that Long Reads readers really loved was a piece by Armin Rosen about Mogadishu. I don't want anyone to not know that there's a long piece by Armin Rosen about Mogadishu in the magazine. I don't want anyone to miss that. Even if it's not a thing they ever thought they would want to read or, I want them to know it was there.
Well, I think that's the other thing too, is your algorithm may not know that you want to read about a certain topic, but having it laid out before you will pique your interest.
Exactly. And that now you're in the subjects that really excite me, which is, layout, design, how you actually visually present a piece, how you put yourself in the place of a reader who's never heard of this piece and think about what would lasso them in. That's the stuff that I really like to think about.
Do you think as your staff has also gotten younger, or younger people have been coming out of the woodwork a little bit more, do you think that with print, there's been more of an appetite among a younger readership in the last
They drove it. They drove the move to print. We just moved to print in June, entirely driven by the younger cohort.
Wow.
And it was actually the most incredible. I do like totally informal focus grouping with groups of people that I give speeches to, or groups of people that come to Tablet events, even events that we do online. And over the years, I collected, especially since October 7th, I collected, a bunch of young readers that were really smart and that read Tablet every day. And I tried to do a little focus group with them about the next iteration of Tablet. And nearly every single one of them said they wanted print. And one of them put it in this incredible way. He said, I don't know anything other than the internet. When I grew up, the internet was the wallpaper in my life. But by the same token, I also know I can start a website in my basement and call it like the Lawrenceville Plain Dealer and put up a bunch of news. And he's like, and it'll all be fake. And I know it's fake. But if you put something, if somebody sends me something in the mail, I know that somebody put money and time and creative resources into making that product. It's not to say that I necessarily trust every word that I read in it, but I trust it more than I trust pixels. And that was a kind of incredible insight, and it drove that move.
Very depressing too. I have not thought about that, but if you have only grown up with the internet, that is, the idea of that wallpapering your life is very sad, but also cool that there is that recognition that there's a fun experience of going through a print product, and then also, a little bit more legitimacy that someone spent the time to put it out there.
Totally.
What advice would you give to someone who's trying to maybe add opinion to something that they're writing, or kind of get into the type of writing that Tablet does? How would you, or what do you say to those who may pitch and it's not the right fit? What advice do you have there?
Well, I think it's different. My advice is different depending on the problem that I'm looking at with the pitch. I have to say that I think that the thing that's missing a lot from pitches, and this has nothing to do with, there's no demographic difference between in what I'm saying. So it's not like younger writers have this more than older writers or whatever, more experience, less experience. I'm feeling there's like a way in which people want to write about their feelings a lot, which is totally fine. But I actually don't really get a sense that they care a lot about their feelings, or that they're really interrogating what about a story moved them and why. And sometimes that feeling is fear. Sometimes that feeling is anger. Sometimes the feeling is betrayal. Sometimes the feeling is love or attraction. And when you get a pitch from somebody who's deeply emotionally connected to a story, for Tablet at least, as you've started to see, as you've read the magazine, our pieces have strong perspectives, and that is not a liability. It's an advantage. But part of having a strong perspective is making sure that our writers are self-aware and making sure that they understand their own emotional investment, but also making sure that they don't shy away from their emotional investment. So as weird as it is for me to say, I'm not arguing that you can write for me about your feelings. That's fine. I have plenty of pieces that are about people's feelings and their personal lives. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what feeling actually moves you if you want to write about agriculture. What feeling really moves you if you want to write about Egon Schiele? What feeling is moving you if you want to write about education policy in America? I want to be able to perceive a strong sentiment on your part as a writer.
What type of pitch is something that you would say, not there yet, not right for us? What type of thing do you see that isn't the strongest?
I can answer in the opposite. So I'll tell you what kind of pitch I like.
Yeah.
2 things I need in a pitch. 1, I need to know that you actually understand the context for your story. So if you write for me, I want to write about gestation crates. Even though I'm already interested in it, it's not there yet. If you say to me, I want to write about gestation crates because this is an easy, low-hanging fruit for a set of people who are all politically very different and makes zero sense on any political spectrum, on any side of the political spectrum, now I know that you understand the particular context right now for reporting on that story. So I need you to tell me that you get what we used to call the nut graph or the billboard. You get the heart of the story, which, by the way, can be 2 sentences, does not have to be long. And the other thing I need to know you can string together a sentence.
Definitely. Definitely. You say what used to be called the nut graph. Has that concept fallen away? That would also be very depressing.
Lady, you and me are the only 2 people, I think, in a 50-mile radius. I mean, I say nut graft to people and they look at me like I'm an alien. So if you live in a world where you say nut graft to people and they nod their heads, congratulations. That's a great place to live. I just think it's one of those things that it's fallen out of use, but maybe it'll come back, or maybe it's coming back already.
Definitely. And that is, I teach college classes too. So maybe that's something in the world I want to see.
Right.
I talk about the so what of the nut graft. So that makes sense I'm glad that that's also something that you look for.
Yes, very much so. Very much so.
Well, Alana, thank you so much for joining the podcast, and any future cover stories you want to talk about, we would love to. So thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode of the Sunday Long Read podcast was produced by Matthew Whitehurst and me, Amanda Ulrich. The co-founders of the Sunday Long Read newsletter are Jacob Feldman and Don Van Natta Jr. Until next time, thanks for listening.